Hello and welcome back to my channel. So today is Christmas. Nice time to debunk some Christian myths, right? Relics and Christianity go hand in hand. Apart from the non-decaying saints, there are many things which Christians consider as sacred relics. There are the pieces of the cross on which Jesus was crucified, the cloth with which he wiped his face whilst carrying the cross, which is called Veronica's veil, the nails used to crucify him, his crown of thorns, and don't laugh, even his holy foreskin is available to see. Now, many churches have claimed to have these in their possession at various times in history, and people flock to these churches to see the cross or his foreskin. The most interesting thing is that there are multiple copies of these relics found across Europe, and everyone claims theirs is original. I mean, how much foreskin did the guy have for all these churches to preserve it? You don't believe me? Search for Holy Prepuce on Wikipedia to know more. But there is one miracle which stands alone in the sea of miracles. There is only one such relic available in the entire world. That itself is a miracle, isn't it? And that is the story of the Shroud of Turin. Just another religious lie to fool the believers. Hello, I'm Anand and you're watching Pale Blue Thoughts, the channel which tries to promote scientific temper by debunking pseudoscience. So what is the Shroud of Turin? A shroud means a cloth that is wrapped around dead bodies. Turin is a place in Italy where this particular shroud is kept. The Shroud of Turin is simply a piece of linen cloth that is believed to be the burial cloth of Jesus Christ after his crucifixion and death. This piece of cloth has the faint image of the front and back view of a naked man with his hands folded across his groin. The image appears to be of a man with a beard, moustache and shoulder-length hair parted in the middle. Believers claim that this is the face of Jesus which got miraculously imprinted on the cloth. Now the interesting fact is that it is not clearly visible or distinct when you look at the cloth directly. However, when a photograph is taken of the shroud and the negative of that photo is developed, that is when the miracle happens. The negative of the photograph essentially reverses the tones and colors. Dark areas become light and light areas become dark. This reversal in the tones can make the faint image on the shroud more distinct and visible, making certain features like eyes, nose and mouth more recognizable. The earliest known historical records of the Shroud of Turin date back to the 14th century. It's believed that the shroud was in possession of a French knight named Geoffroy de Charny, who exhibited it in France. It was later acquired by House of Savoy, an Italian royal house, in 1453 and later kept in a chapel in Chambray, France. In 1578, the Savoys moved the shroud to the new capital in Turin, where it has remained ever since. Since 1683, it has been kept in the chapel of the Holy Shroud in Turin, which was specifically built to house the cloth. It is displayed very rarely to the public, and its last public display was in 2015. Now this shroud was damaged in a fire in 1532 when it was kept in the chapel in France. There are some bone holes and scorched areas on both sides of the linen, and some patches were sewn into it by some nuns to repair the damage caused by the fire. Even though it has been displayed publicly many times, it has been allowed to be photographed only in 1898. But the interesting thing was that no one knew the clear reverse image existed on the shroud, since the faint face image on the shroud cannot be clearly observed with the naked eye. After overcoming several challenges due to the technology available at that time, the photographer Secondo Pia managed to click the photograph. When he developed the negative of the photograph, he almost dropped and broke the photographic plate in the darkroom from the shock of what appeared on it. The reverse plate showed the positive image of a man and a face in a detail that could not be seen with the naked eye. And that was it. A new miracle had been born. People flocked in thousands to have a glimpse of the face of Jesus on a piece of linen cloth. The Catholic Church, of course, saw this as a huge money-making scheme. They have not made an official statement declaring that the Shroud of Turin is an authentic relic. The church has approached the shroud with interest, acknowledging its significance to many believers while holding back from making a final statement about its authenticity. The church has not formally endorsed it as an object definitely linked to Jesus. Instead, the church encourages respect for the cloth as a significant religious artifact while leaving its authenticity open to the believers. And as believers go, they will believe anything without evidence, without any problem. Now, what has science done to find out if the shroud is authentic or a fake? Secondopia's photographs of the shroud allowed the scientific community to begin to study it. The first direct examination of the shroud by a scientific team was undertaken in 1969 in order to advise on preservation of the shroud and determine specific testing methods. In 1977, 3 scientists and over 30 other experts in various fields formed the Shroud of Turin Research Project, or STURP. They took several samples from the surface of shroud using adhesive tapes. Walter Macron, a leading expert in authentication of historical documents and works of art, examined the tapes using various scientific techniques. They discovered that the image wasn't made by any paint. Instead, they found traces of pigments like red ochre and vermilion in certain areas, indicating that it might have been imprinted. Macron reported that no actual blood was present in the samples taken from the shroud. The STURP committee also pointed out several mistakes in the proportionality of the body and the way people were crucified in those times. They found that the length of the arms and the size of the head appear somewhat distorted or disproportionate compared to typical human anatomy. In a typical crucifixion, the body would undergo certain physical changes due to rigor mortis and decomposition. However, the body image on the shroud appears relatively unaltered, lacking signs of expected physical changes that would occur after death by crucifixion. The positioning of the wounds depicted on the shroud doesn't entirely match historical crucifixion methods. For example, the placement of the nails on the wrist rather than on the palms is inconsistent with typical Roman crucifixion practices. There is more evidence that points out that this cloth was created during the medieval times. Certain details, such as the weaving pattern and the way the cloth was dyed or painted, align more with medieval techniques than those of the 1st century. The herringbone weave in which the cloth has been made did not exist during Jesus' time. The few samples of burial clothes that we have got from the era are made using plain weave, not herringbone. Analysis of pollen and plant material found on the shroud doesn't match the flora that would have been present in the region of Jerusalem during Jesus' time. Instead, it corresponds more closely to the flora of Europe during the medieval period. Finally, they decided to do radiocarbon dating on the cloth in 1988. That would indicate when the flax plant from which the linen was obtained lived. 3 independent tests were conducted at 3 separate universities. The results all indicated that the cloth dated back to the Middle Ages, somewhere between 1260 and 1390 AD. That was a huge red flag because it corresponded to the time when the shroud first surfaced. It suggests that the shroud could have been created during that period and not during the time of Jesus, who is supposed to have lived between the 4th century BC and 30th century AD. Now, some scientists who were believers themselves concluded that the study was flawed because they examined only the edges of the shroud, which had been restored by the nuns after the fire in the 16th century. They suggested that more research is needed to find out the real age of the shroud. But remember, this carbon dating said 1260 and the fire happened in 16th century. So there's a huge gap of difference in years when it comes to the authenticity of the shroud. But to do more research, the Vatican needs to let them study it again. It seems like the Vatican is unsure about letting more tests happen because church officials are not very willing to allow it. They fear that the truth might be revealed if experts examine it now with the technologies that we have at our disposal today. So how was the image created? Well, it is very difficult for experts to find out without them getting access to the shroud. However, researchers have replicated similar images through various techniques. It's been demonstrated without a doubt that medieval techniques such as painting or imprinting could have been used to create the image on the cloth. So the scientific evidence points more towards the shroud being a medieval creation rather than an authentic relic from Jesus' time. But for many believers, the shroud represents a powerful and sacred relic associated with Jesus Christ. Their faith and religious convictions lead them to accept the shroud as a genuine artifact linked to Jesus' crucifixion and burial, regardless of scientific conclusions. That is human nature, to believe things without evidence. It is the easier route, and it is something that we have accumulated as part of evolution. I'm sure the 90s kids would remember the days when idols of Ganesh started drinking milk. Even the educated were fooled into believing that an idol could drink milk, which was actually caused due to capillary action, which they all learned in school. And then there were Virgin Marys crying blood. And more recently, as recent as last week, we saw this news that some villages were worshipping dinosaur eggs as their Kuldevatas for decades. Their Kakar Bhairava that was protecting their farmland and cattle from problems and misfortune turned out to be eggs of a titanosaur, one of the largest dinosaurs to have roamed the earth. Crazy, isn't it? When you're affected by the malware called religion, it shuts your brain from thinking straight and logically. And channels like these are the beacons of hope for a better world. So if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, this is the time. I shall see you soon in another scientific temper promoting video. Until then, it's bye-bye from Pale Blue Thoughts.